All right, welcome everyone to another edition of the Infinite Expansion podcast, brought to you by the Last American Vagabond. I'm going to be your host, Tim. So today I wanted to take a little time to talk about the marijuana movement. Obviously, this is something that a lot of people are already kind of familiar with. We see it in the news. They understand, that it's becoming more legal. It's becoming less of a stigma. But I wanted to actually go a little bit farther behind the scenes, kind of go under the hood a little bit of this movement and talk about some things that don't often get discussed, kind of what this movement is turning into, what's the structure under the hood. We just hear the word legalization and we think everything's great, but a lot of people aren't looking kind of beyond that into what is going on under the hood. And to talk about this, I wanted to bring on none other than the founder of the Last American Vagabond. This is actually, I think, our first podcast together, which is pretty cool.
Yes,
it's about time. So I wanted to bring on Ryan Christian. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks for having me on, Tim.
Yes. So before we start looking at some of the stuff under the hood, I wanted first just to kind of introduce the movement. Kind of where's the marijuana movement at right now? What are we looking at the current moment?
Well, I mean, it's such a broad question. I think that the best way to understand where it is now is to kind of understand where it started in essence. And, really when I first created the Last American Vagabond, it was all about cannabis. That's kind of where it was focused. And we've really kind of followed along with the progression of the whole movement. And, I really personally believe that it really has a foundation in civil rights. And that, the whole thing kind of centers around the idea of freedom of choice and freedom to do what you will with your own body or to grow what you want or any of those type of things. And that marijuana was simply something that the public could get behind because it's something that, we all know that everybody smokes cannabis. I mean, it's one of those kind of, taboo topics, but everybody, smokes cannabis these days, And so it was something that people could really get behind. And so it was led into the public view as a cannabis movement. And obviously the primary idea was freedom of cannabis and being able to do what you want, smoke it, using for medical purposes, whatever. But that it kind of surged this idea of civil liberties, civil justice. And so now what we're seeing it's spread to the point to where most states are on board with trying to make it legal to some regard, whether that's medical, recreational. And the federal government is kind of just pretending now like it's not happening. I mean, we've come to the point where it's pretty obvious what the public wants. I mean, if we're still pretending to be a democracy, the majority clearly wants legalization in some aspect. But right now, they're just kind of pretending not to pay attention to it. And I think that all stems from the idea that they want to maintain control of it. It comes back to the state-fed dynamic, really.
And how many, do you know off the top of your head, how many states it is fully legal? How many have decriminalized? Off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head, I believe the last time I checked, it was about 33 states that were legal in some fashion. Plus, Washington D.C. is not a state, but still has. Funny enough, Washington D.C. has recreational legalized marijuana, which is funny to me that's their home hub, and it's like one of the first places. But right now, it's about 33, as I remember, and then we have other countries doing it as well. Such as, there's there are a lot of countries that have it legalized for a while now. But as far as the United States is concerned, I think we're going to see easily the majority of the rest of the states come on board, in whether that be medical or recreational, within the next couple of years. As of right now, I believe there's at least 4 other states that have legislation in progress right now.
Yeah, and I also think that almost all the states now have, for the most part, decriminalized it to a certain extent, where it's mostly maybe you'll pay a fine or it's not, the legal ramifications are not as strong. While we do see outlier cases here and there, when they want to put their teeth in and show what they can do, but for the most part, I think that that trend is pretty common. What would you say, before we go into some other aspects, what would you say some of the positives of this movement are? Because we're going to go into some things that we're going to have to work through, but there's no doubt there's been a lot of positive change to this. And what are some of those areas you think are at?
Well, coming from the first part of the question, or it really stems again into, just civil rights. And I believe that this is a huge step to open up not only, the idea of maintaining our civil rights, but opening people's eyes to the idea that the people still have a pretty great amount of power when they can come together and decide on one thing and then make their voice heard. Because we know that there's plenty of things we all agree on, but unless we can stand up and unanimously speak out, which is pretty hard to do these days, then nothing's going to change. But that's one of the first things that I really think is the civil rights aspect is really on the table now. It's always been a hot topic, but we're seeing now today that we can actually see change happen. But outside of that, I think just the medical industry is the biggest aspect. I mean, we're seeing, as much as they're continuing to try to deny it left and right, I mean, they're just actively denying the fact that it still has any medical properties. It's still a Schedule I substance, which for people that don't know, pretty much just means that it's claimed to have zero medical properties and be highly addictive. Two things we know are, wildly untrue about cannabis. But we're seeing the medical aspect grow in all regards. We're seeing all the holistic medicine pop off everywhere. People are starting to find ways to, you go all the way back to Rick Simpson with his, Phoenix Tears Foundation. And now, those kind of things are everywhere now. You can find CBD oil all over. Any place where it's, legalized medically, there's just 50 different choices these days. And I love that. I mean, the idea of choice is what this country should be all about. And so, being able to choose your own medical direction is a huge part of that for me.
Right. I'm with you, especially like when you're talking about the medicine aspect, but also like, as we were talking just before, if you would have asked people 5-10 years ago, would marijuana be where it is today? Most people would have thought you were crazy. I remember telling people I kind of believed it was going this direction, but I was always hit with tons of resistance. But what is awesome is that it shows that change, is still possible. It's not easy and it takes a lot of work, but it's there. I mean, it can happen. I mean, we can see it in the last 5 to 10 years that it's not just the legal part, but the stigma. I mean, I know so many people who had massive reservations and just, concrete beliefs on it, and those have largely disappeared. People look at it in the same regard as, say, alcohol. It's something, if you want to do, it's a personal choice, and it's not like it's, the stigma is totally starting to disappear, which is very exciting to me.
Right. That's just people, kind of shaking off the propaganda. It's hard for most people to break away from that narrative. It's been indoctrinated into us since we were born. And that even those of us that are awake, or people that are, been smoking their whole lives will still find that they have those stigmas in their mind, whether it be addiction or that it causes cancer. Even people that are active, advocates for cannabis still don't even realize that they have a few of those propagandized ideas that stay with them, and it's just funny that we can't shake those off, even though we're awake to it.
Right. So let's shift gears a little bit here. And so I wanted to go into the main reason of this podcast was to go into a little bit deeper issues on the marijuana movement, because it's happening now. The movement is happening. Okay. So, and I think the established system, they know that they can't really stop this from happening, but they can potentially hijack the movement and structure it in a way that benefits them. And one of those ways that we see forming is big marijuana, and how, it's kind of creating a central control of how marijuana is sold, grown, and it's kind of forming kind of like a cartel of companies. Could you maybe go into a little bit how this legalization movement is leading to what many refer to as big marijuana, kind of like how big pharma has come about in the pharmaceutical industry?
Yeah, well, we've seen a rise of a corporate entity behind pretty much anything that can produce a profit in this country. I mean, you're going to see that build behind anything that they find could produce money for them. And we're seeing the same thing with cannabis today. And really, it's coming down to kind of the same thing we said a second ago with the federal versus state dynamic. And they're just making sure to keep it quasi-legal. It really gives them the control at the end of the day. As long as they can still claim at a federal level that cannabis is illegal, they have complete control. They can pull licenses. They can make it illegal again. They can do whatever they want. And so it gives them that power. And I think the biggest one that ties into it is kind of making growing marijuana personally still illegal, which is the way I believe is still in Washington. And many advocates will speak out about that. A lot of activists will speak out saying that is just simply another measure of their control. And is until we can grow it ourselves and it's completely legal in that regard, that's not freedom. You know what I mean? We should be able to grow it in our backyards. It's a plant. It's something we should be able to do on our own time. And doing that, it allows them to continue to funnel all the money into tax-driven business, which continues to push the money to the system.
Right. I think you made up a great point. Like, we can't settle. This isn't really, it's like we got a little treat. Oh, we made it. And I don't think that's smart for us. And some of the stuff that I've uncovered doing some more research for this article or this podcast is like some of the ways they do that is, for example, in Florida, they gave away 5 licenses to growers, 5 licenses for the whole state to grow. And you can see right there, I mean, who's going to get these licenses? Obviously, people who are politically connected. They're not just going to give it to Joe Schmo over there who wants to, just have his own personal business. It's a big business. So one of the ways they do that is licensing. And that's, that you could call that regulation. Another way that I've found is, taxes. They put a lot of taxes. Why necessarily does this need to be so taxed so high? Why? It actually is making marijuana more expensive than what it used to be. Also, like I said, license before, if you have anything on your record, if you have, anything, you're not going to get a license to grow. And these have been heavily contested issues in many states. In Ohio, it was a big thing. I think it was like, I don't want to quote the exact number, but 10 to 13 licenses only for the whole state. And there was a big pushback. Actually, a lot of people currently in the quasi-legal marijuana business were actually against some of the legalization measures because of these reasons. And so we don't really see that stuff behind the scenes. We just think, oh, legalization, great. But we don't really see how it's really forming into big business. And with all these regulations and taxes and then all these other things, what happens is small businesses, then they can't compete. And then they have to look to Wall Street, big money, who then get heavily involved. And really, that's all about the bottom line. And look, I understand business is, it's still a business and the greater scheme of things, but you don't want a bunch of, when you get all this money that only cares about profit and has is not really connected to the roots of the movement and freedom and civil liberties like you talked about, I think that opens up a can of worms that maybe we don't want to see.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, what people don't realize is that the medical marijuana industry is $1 billion industry. There's so much money. It's the new up and coming industry for the elites to jump on top of. And as it was before it became quasi legal, what they fought tooth and nail to keep it illegal because all of their money was invested in things that cannabis could stand to replace. So now that it's become in this middle ground, they're now fighting to keep it that way, the same way they were before. They want to keep it medical marijuana. They don't want legalization because they found their ways to profit from the current status quo. And so they're actively fighting to keep it that way.
And I think even if they do legalize it, that could still limit the number of licenses. They can heavily regulate it, heavily tax it. And all that money then funnels back into the system. And really, is that real freedom? I don't personally believe so, but is it a step in the right direction? I don't know. Yes, but it's not like it was. Decriminalization could be almost more of a step in a direction if it promotes all these small businesses. So I don't know. It's something that is at least in this discussion that we're not having enough in this movement that I think needs to happen more. And so kind of branching into the next under the hood topic is GMOs in marijuana. Something I don't think that's talked about at all. Now there was a rumor going around or was a story going around for a while that Monsanto had developed GMO marijuana. It was actually turned out to be from a false news site, but could you maybe go into a little bit about GMOs and marijuana and where this movement where this potential problem or might be at right now?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that GMOs in essence are a very dangerous thing. And it's something that to think that a company would not put their interest into something like cannabis, knowing that it's such a huge market, knowing that they could profit wildly if they get on it first. It's ridiculous and naive to think that somebody, multiple people aren't actively trying to do that. But as far as I know, there is the first one that I was made aware of. I actually covered this about a year ago. Is a group called Prairie Plant Systems Incorporated, and they were based out of Canada. They began to mass produce cannabis, and they were given basically the license to mass produce cannabis for Canada. And the company is literally known, their primary objective is genetic modification of plants to fulfill specific needs, most currently plant-based pharmaceuticals. So this is what this company does. And so they have the contract exclusively to do this. And so to think that they're not actively doing this now, and this was a year ago, it's just naive. I mean, it's happening as far as I'm concerned. I don't have any verifiable proof, but it's GMOs are everywhere. And they didn't ask our permission to do any number of the things they're doing now. So to think that they didn't ask for that, they're probably doing it as we speak. But, right. She's spoken out about the fact that cannabis already has been, actually her name is Dr. Fidelia Cassini. I think Huffington Post actually did an article about her, and she actively spoke out about the fact that she found chemicals within cannabis today that are highly suggestive of GMO traits, which doesn't necessarily mean for certain that it was. But she also says that they're a journal, I think called Plant Biotechnology Journal, has already demonstrated that they genetically modified other plants to produce higher chemicals, say like the poppy plant to produce 30% more opium. So they're actively trying to figure these things out. So it's in my opinion, it's already happening.
Right. I think you make up a good point there that they don't tell us they're going to do these things before they do it. They do them, they get caught, and then we learn they're doing them. I mean, right. This is, you can look at all throughout history and find this going on, especially then when you look into companies that are probably doing it, which are like Monsanto and DuPont. And while I don't have a scientifically verified paper that they're 100% doing it, to believe that they're not working on it behind the scenes, I think is totally naive at best. And to think that this is not something that's going to become a bigger topic moving forward is also, I think, completely naive. And then if you think about it, you're giving only a few licenses away. You're giving them to potentially big money, big companies. To think that GMOs then are not going to start coming into play, or if not already in play, I think you're really lying to yourself if you don't at least see that there's probably some connections there, and then it needs to be discussed and looked into more. So I think this is also a very important topic that just we don't talk about very much in the marijuana movement. It's just legalization. Yep, done, great, over. It's so much more complex than that.
Right. That's a great point to bring up too. Is that just because legislation comes through that claims to be legalizing, we shouldn't just jump on it. I mean, that's such a there are a lot of stipulations within all of these things. There's even riders that go along with legislation that we should be aware of. But just the point is that they could pass legislation that feigns legalization, but really gives them complete control over the industry. And that's exactly what we need to be aware of.
Yeah. And I want to go last little topic before we end. I wanted to discuss hemp a little bit. Now, I understand some people probably know what hemp is, but I feel like a lot of people who smoke marijuana, who are or for the movement, don't even know what hemp is, to be honest. I would venture a lot of people don't. So I was wondering if you could explain what hemp is a little bit and how it is different from marijuana, and kind of explain what we can use it for, what of its purposes, and kind of what is the legal status of hemp going forward.
Okay. Well, hemp is, I think the history is the best place to start there as well, is that the idea of hemp, the reason that people aren't aware of what it really is, or the fact that it's muddied, is that you go all the way back to the beginning of illegalization of hemp with the Hearst family and DuPont, and really that basically infringing on their timber rights. They decided to kind of muddy the waters between what hemp and back then it was called marijuana with an H, because people didn't know what marijuana was. They'd never heard of that before. And so they kind of muddied the two together and then slipped it through, saying this encroaching Mexican force with their marijuana, they made it all about the Mexicans crossing over to the United States are a very dangerous thing. And so they scared everyone up. That's where you're seeing, your reefer madness type of stuff down the line come out. that same kind of scare tactic, and passed the Marijuana Taxation Act, which was essentially legalization, but kept the rights for the elite to be able to use it. But they essentially illegalized hemp and marijuana together as a whole, making them think it was only marijuana. And the sad part is that at that point in time, they were using hemp for paper, for rope for sails on their ships, for a number of things, medicine. And so if the public was actually aware that they were illegalizing hemp, they would have rioted. But they tricked everybody essentially. And so then the time went on, and hemp just continued to fall out of use, except for very specific things like the Navy continued to use hemp well past its legalization, which is funny. But once it was legalized, people just forgot about it. So it fell out of the common use. But really, hemp in itself is just another genus of the cannabis plant. It's, as far as I know, there are 3 different types of cannabis, like marijuana cannabis, which is it's indica, sativa, and ruderalis. Most people don't even know that ruderalis is another type. And then hemp is just another type of the same plant. It doesn't have any THC. Well, it has very, very small amounts of THC, typically about 0.03%, which you can't get high off of. And really, it's a stock, hardy type of plant that can be used for a multitude of things, primarily rope and paper and things like that. And really, hemp can produce 4 times as much paper as any trees. So, I mean, everything about it is better. Medicine, all these different things. And really that, in my opinion, is why it's forcefully illegalized, because it stands to replace all of these different things that people have all their money invested in. And also really just, they're afraid to admit they've been wrong for so long. You know what I mean? Like they're going to stand out and say, hey, sorry, we've been wrong for 100 years. Go ahead and use it now. I don't think that's going to happen.
Right. Yeah. I mean, actually, I learned that the Declaration of Independence was written on hemp paper. Yep. But I think you bring up a great point that it's just a major threat to all the established industries, and established systems want to remain relevant and established. That biggest threat is competitors breaking apart established systems. And hemp has the ability to break apart a lot of established systems. It's very easy to grow. It's very durable, strong. You can build houses out of hemp. Actually, I might try to drop a link in the show notes about, I've seen some really beautiful houses built out of hemp. It's a very strong fiber. It can be used in tons of industrial activities, as well as, I guess, medicinal purposes. I don't know as much on those areas, but
it's considered one of the most versatile plants in the world, or if not the most versatile plant in the world. I think the only reason people are afraid to say the most versatile is because they're afraid to get, all the non-believers to crack down on them. But as far as all the research that I've seen, easily the most versatile plant on the planet. The industrial side of it is fantastic as far as building paper, rope, all these different things. But the medical side is phenomenal. I mean, that's all cannabis and everything, but hemp specifically has fantastic medical properties that will stand to replace just a million different pharmaceutical drugs that already don't work. So that's dangerous for them.
What's the current legal status on hemp? I know it is used in some things, like I've seen lotion, hemp lotion, some other things. Like what is the legal status of hemp?
It's very weird and quasi-legal, because as more people become aware of the fact that hemp is not cannabis, at least the psychoactive cannabis that they're actively fighting against, it's kind of, this weird middle ground. And I mean, even not even a couple years ago, the Navy actually stopped ordering specific yogurt because it had hemp seeds in it, because it was illegal. Really, which is ridiculous, because there's no, you can't get high off a hemp seed. But I think they were just trying to make a point about it. But right now you can buy hemp seeds at the store. You can go out and order hemp clothing, but growing hemp right now in most places is still illegal. And I think that what's funny is that why would they allow you? I mean, as far as I know, USA is one of the largest importers of hemp in the world. So it's such a hypocrisy to say it's illegal, but then take in the most of it in the world. But it's them keeping control of it. They're allowing us to eat it, use it in every regard, but then they won't let us grow it, because then we could produce our own. What it comes down to.
I totally agree. Growing it would open up a whole can of worms and hurt a lot of big business. And obviously that's not what they want to see. All right, to wrap it up here, where do you see this going forward? Where do you see the marijuana movement going forward, and what would you like to? What kind of advice would you like listeners to take? Kind of moving forward with this movement?
Well, I honestly think that what we're going to see something shift and change within the next few election cycles here. or not even presidential election cycles, but just, we're going to see somebody, I don't know who it will be, which they're already starting to see, but we're going to see somebody make this their platform, just 100% legalizing cannabis, which is already kind of happening.
And Gary Johnson, sorry to interrupt, but I think Gary Johnson already is kind of trying to use that platform, the libertarian candidate.
Right. And we're going to see it happen more and more. I mean, really, it's going to be, which is funny because it shouldn't be used that way. It's unfortunate. It should be a freedom issue, but really they're just using it as a political PowerPoint. But it's going to happen because they're going to continue to push it into the public eye. They already know that Americans as a whole, I think it's like 73% at this point, want it to be legalized in some fashion, whether that be medical or recreational. So we're going to see it shift. It's going to push in the next couple years, or maybe sooner than that. But my advice for people is just to keep an open mind with this stuff and don't just jump on the first thing that they're out there. Because if history has shown us anything, they're going to attempt to manipulate this entire process. So we need to keep our eyes open and fight for 100% decriminalization and legalization. We need to be able to grow it in our backyards, smoke it in the street, do whatever you want with it. You should use cannabis oil on your, for whatever, any purpose you find it need for, that's what you should be using it for. So that's what you don't settle for anything less than that. You need to speak out about it, go out and get in the ears of your politicians and your local legislature and make sure that people know this is important to us. I find it absolutely ridiculous that we can have such a vast majority of the country that wants something and it doesn't even get discussed barely. I think that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. We should not stop until it's 100% legal and 100% decriminalized. Stopping short because we got a little cookie is we cannot let that happen. And that's what they want to happen. That's what they want us to do. Like, oh, it's legalized. We got a big cartel that's running it. Don't worry about a thing. Go back to sleep. That's exactly what they want. But I don't think that. I personally think that this movement, I think it's going to catapult all over the world. It already kind of is. You have Australia looking more towards it. You got a lot of countries. It's not even like, maybe it's illegal, but it's not really a big deal at all. I think soon it's going to be, in 10, 20 years, I don't think there's going to be most countries, it's going to be fully legal at that point. But like we talked about, we have to push it forward. The movement is evolving. Now it's about, we've got the foot in the door, but we cannot stop. We got to keep until we can grow it in our backyards. And like we had talked about before, I think the real change is that people start growing their own and start being self-sufficient with things, not just marijuana, food, many other things, building their own things instead of being reliant on big business or whatever. This is all part of the decentralization movement of people starting to be their own providers in a way. So I'm totally on board with all that.
I would say that the most important thing at the end of the day, like you were just kind of hitting on there, is to continue to push this past cannabis. You know what I mean? Like, we need to be aware of the fact that this whole thing shows us as a society that if we actually stand together and unite, that we have power. Even at this late totalitarian police state stage, we have power if we can unite and actively speak out together. So we need to continue to push legalization for cannabis, but at the same time, use this as a rallying point to stand and push other civil liberties. We fight for our rights that are constantly being eroded right now, and use this as that platform to push forward.
Yeah, that's a great point to end on. So I'm going to drop a few links in the show notes. Ryan's written some really good articles about the marijuana movement, about a lot of these topics that we've talked about, including the GMO'S, the big marijuana, some other ones. So I want to drop some links in the show notes. Please go check that out. Please check out The Last American Vagabond. We're going to have a lot of great stuff coming moving forward. This project that we've been working on in the last few years is really starting to grow. So it's a really exciting time for it. Once again, thank you for listening. I hope you did learn something, and keep pushing. Thanks again. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks for having me on, Tim.